This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Hey, what's up, and welcome to Q&A, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and Twitter and answer them here on the video format. Because of the new upload schedule, right, that I'm uploading 3 times a day, for the most part, I can't put the question prompt on YouTube like I wanted to or like I used to want to. I usually just kind of put the question prompt for members and then on Twitter. So please make sure if you want to ask questions, you get to me on Twitter. The reason I can't do it because of the upload schedule is because you only get like 3 notifications, 3 notifications a day from YouTube. And if I'm uploading 3 times a day, I don't have a notification left for a community post. So it would just either affect the video or it would affect the post. Either way, to me, it's not worth the risk. So that's why the questions are now on Twitter, if you've been wondering where those questions are. Now let's get into the questions from Joseph, who says, is it even possible to take the division from the Ravens? Probably not. Let's see. The Browns are at what, 5 losses? The Ravens are at 3. They probably drop a game or 2. I don't know who has the tiebreaker between the Ravens and the Browns, but basically it would require the Browns winning out. If the Browns win out, anything's possible. 12-5 is most certainly good enough to win the division. But I don't think that the Browns will win out. I think the Browns' best case scenario is like maybe 11 games, winning 11 games. And if they get to 11, I don't think they win the division. So I don't think they're going to be able to take the division away from Baltimore, and Cleveland is the only team at this point that it feels like could even remotely have that conversation. Watkins intern says, how important was the Pittsburgh loss for the Browns? The Pittsburgh loss was pretty important for the Browns when it comes to some of the wild card stuff, because what I believe it does is it elevates all of those AFC South teams into the playoff conversation. And the Browns have the tiebreaker over the Colts. The Browns could have the tiebreaker if they beat the Texans over the Texans. And they have the tiebreaker over other teams. Basically, it put the Browns in a position where they're the team that, hey, if all things are even, if everybody's at 10-7, the Browns get that tiebreaker over everybody else. So yeah, that was very important, because up until that point, Pittsburgh was the tiebreaker team. Now that they have lost those 2 games and they have a hard schedule coming up, we'll see where they get to. But if they don't get back to 10 wins or get back on track for 10 wins, then it's going to be very difficult for them to make the playoffs, because now they aren't the tiebreaker team. The Browns are now that 5th seeded tiebreaker team. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, that was a big loss there. Also, it keeps you from the bottom of the division as well. UK Browns fan says, do you think Trevor plays this week? And if so, how effective do you think he can be with a high ankle sprain? I expect Trevor Lawrence to play, and to play like Trevor Lawrence. I am not about to sit here and get fooled, and I'm not saying get fooled like he's faking an injury or anything. I'm not about to try to convince myself that the Browns are going to have some kind of easy ride because it looked like Trevor might have an injury. If Trevor feels like he can play, then Trevor feels like he could play well enough to be Trevor Lawrence. I don't believe that Trevor Lawrence is selfish enough to go out there when he's not 100%. And I think that Trevor's going to play. If he plays, he's going to be healthy enough to go. And I think Trevor's healthy enough to go. So I would not expect any diminished anything from Trevor Lawrence. I expect, and I think the Browns should expect, to get the full Trevor Lawrence experience and be ready to defend Trevor Lawrence. Now, how good is Trevor Lawrence? That's an open question. But as far as playing against him, expect Trevor Lawrence to be who you think he is. The next question comes from Brian, who says, what do you think the plan will be next year? Obviously, the money will be tight, but they have to give Watson the best chance possible. It's going to be similar to this year. I mean, they're going to restructure a bunch of contracts, free up some money, bring some guys back, and have a similar team to last year. Don't believe all this stuff that you hear about the Browns going to be like bankrupt or something by the contract. Everybody does this kind of hand-wringing about contracts and salary caps. And it's basically a result of a bunch of people talking about stuff they don't understand. And when you don't understand the cap, it's easy to get caught up in that. I remember my first few years doing this, I used to get caught up in that trap of looking at the salary cap website page and saying, oh my God, this team's going to be 80 million over the cap. They're not going to be able to keep anybody. They're going to have to trade all their players. And then that never happens, right? We did this with the Saints for like 4 years. It never happened. They still got all their players. The Browns probably going to be a similar thing, right? Everybody's going to predict doom and gloom, but as long as the NFL is still really popular, the cap's going to go up. As long as the cap keeps going up, then the Browns probably going to be fine. But thank you for the question. I have Chubb. Yeah, so silly. Says, this is looking into the future, but how many players do you think we lose next season because of the cap? I heard a lot of people in the offseason saying that this is a win now year, but with all the cap rollover, now I think next year fits. Every year is a win now year. Right? Every year is a win now year. Your team's not super young. As long as you can keep most of your core together, every year is a win now year. And it's not like Nick Chubb's going to be a free agent, even though his contract can be renegotiated next year. It's not like Myles Garrett is going to be a free agent. It's not like those pieces, Denzel Ward, are going to be free agents. So as long as you have the core players on this team, everything else is interchangeable and that core is still there. To me, what people are doing, worrying about losing some of these pieces around them, it's like, hey, you wouldn't worry about the Golden State Warriors if Steph, Draymond, and Clay are still under contract, right? You just wouldn't. You're not got to be out here like, oh my God, well, what are we going to do if Harrison Barnes leaves in free agency? You're going to still be the Golden State Warriors. That's the same thing here. Now, the Browns ain't the Golden State Warriors by any means, but I'm saying you've got your core nucleus. The other pieces are the other pieces you can find guys to fill in there. You got the hard part, right? And hopefully your quarterback steps up. But if your quarterback does step up, then you're going to have a really good team. It's going to be that kind of case next year. But thank you for the question. Casey of House ADA says, do you feel Stefanski should be considered for Coach of the Year? I think he should be. I think Coach of the Year is a bit strong, just because I feel like there have been better coaching jobs out there. I think what Kevin's done has been a good job of getting the most out of what is a injury-riddled group, and it does deserve to be recognized and applauded. But you look at what Dan Campbell has done with the Lions and you say to yourself, well, that's a Coach of the Year type season, right? That's the type of year where you give a guy Coach of the Year because that's what you usually give the award to. A nice turnaround. I understand they were decent last year, but this was a huge turnaround. Best season in Detroit Lions history. Well, since like the 60s, since the days of Bobby Lane. And you're doing it with Jared Goff. And I find that to be very impressive. So, yeah, I think that's going to go to Dan Campbell and the Detroit Lions. And I think he deserves it. But, Kevin deserves to be appreciated. Just because you don't win Coach of the Year don't mean that you weren't appreciated. It's up to us, the people who watch the team every week, to appreciate what Kevin's done with this team. Not necessarily to a committee that kind of glances in on this stuff year in, year out to show that appreciation. So, as long as he's appreciated in this city, that should be enough. Pittsburgh Sucks says, do you think it's possible the Browns could make a deep playoff run with DTR? I don't think it's impossible. I'm not going to say it's like probable that you can do it, but I do think it's not impossible. A lot of what we're thinking with Joe Flacco and DTR is a lot of projection. We just have not seen a ton. We've seen 2 real games of evidence from DTR, some good, some bad. We've seen 1 game of evidence from Joe Flacco, some good, some bad. I think we're catching ourselves doing that thing that Browns fans do sometimes, where we have very little evidence, but we want to get super excited. So we get super excited off of very little evidence. And then we start to build these guys up off of very little evidence. And what that ends up doing is creating a massive amount of resentment the second that person you built up doesn't live up to it. I'm worried about y'all doing this to Joe Flacco because there's been a lot of build up with very little evidence on Joe. And I'm like, if he has a bad game, you guys are going to turn on him like crazy because I've seen it before. The same thing happened to DTR earlier this season. I want to see more, We haven't seen a quarterback play more than 3 straight games for the Cleveland Browns all year. I just want to get to that point. Whether it's DTR, whether it's Joe Flacco, I think it's theoretically possible with both. I don't think that this team asks so much from a quarterback to make a playoff run that it's impossible to get that from DTR or it's impossible to get that from Joe Flacco. I think if you're thinking about the long run of it, you have a better shot with doing it with DTR just because he's younger. There's more of a chance that he can hold up week to week. Where with Joe Flacco at 38, you're kind of betting against Father Time, and Father Time's undefeated. So I would not put myself in a position to bet against Father Time. Go with the younger player if you feel like the play is somewhat comparable. And I do think that the play is comparable. I think DTR is able to make some nice throws. I think Joe Flacco is able to make some nice throws. And I think Joe Flacco is a perfect guy to have to be the safety valve for DTR just in case things go wrong. But that's my 2 cents on that. Mike Wax says, do you consider this week a must-win game? I really don't. If we're talking about what the Browns need to do to make the playoffs, there's a very realistic scenario that the Browns could win 9 games and get into the playoffs as long as they win the Bengals game and the Jets game. Those are the 2 must-wins that you have. You would like to get one of the Jaguars or the Texans game. And then it would be nice to get the Bears game. But when you talk about must wins, you got to win those 2 at the end. Those are your 2 must wins. And you would like to win one of these 2 versus the Jaguars or the Texans. If you get 10 wins, you're going to be in. But if you win one of those 2 games against the Jaguars or the Texans, then it makes your life 1,000% a lot easier. So that's where I'm at on it. I don't think it's a must win. There's still multiple paths that you can get to. If you don't get this game, then you have to get the Texans game. And that's why I have this objection with calling games must win when there's so much season left. Like, people do this in September. People do this in November. There's no such thing as a must win game until like the last 3 weeks of the season. The reason I say that is, let's say people felt like, let's put a random game out there. The Denver game was must win. You got to win that Denver game. No, you don't. Because if you lose that Denver game, which the Browns do, then it just means, okay, you got to win either the the Texans game or the Jaguars game. And then people are coming back, oh, this is a must win game versus the Jaguars. No, it's not. Because if you lose this Jaguars game, that just means, okay, now you got to win the Texans game, and now the Texans game is the must win because that's the one that you would really want to win. But not really, because if you lose the Texans game, you can still get in as long as you beat the Jets and the Bengals. You can't call games that are not, like, would be nice to win must wins. They're not. If you could replace that win with another win down the schedule, it's not a must win. This week's not a must win. It would be a nice to win, but it's not a must win. That doesn't mean that the approach that the players have should change. You should go out there and want to win every Sunday. But let's be real about it. You can't keep saying that you have must win games. No, must win games are reserved for like the last, I'm being generous by saying last 3 weeks of the season. Really last 2 weeks of the season. Those are must win games. But we be using that term in September. I'm like, are we stupid? I'm not stupid. That's a bit harsh. I apologize for that. But it's just, I don't know. We're just so eager to label everything a must-win game. And it's just like, it's not a must-win game. It's still an important game. It's still a game you would like to win. It's still a game that would mean a lot if you did win. But that doesn't mean it's a must-win game. That's just my point. Parker says, why do you feel like this defense doesn't travel well on the road? They're a different animal. You think it's because the war's being gone, or do you think it's something else? Honestly, I just think it is what it is. I don't really think there's a real reason for why they aren't good on the road. This thing is kind of cyclical in the NFL. You'll have teams that are good on the road one year and then bad on the road the next year, and then good on the road the year after, and then bad on the road the year after. And it's just sometimes you just suck on the road for whatever reason. It's not really a good reason why. You just collectively kind of suck on the road. Some teams suck at home. Case in point, the Jaguars are terrible at home this year. They've won 2 home games this season. They're like 2-4 or something like that at home. Meanwhile, the Browns are pretty good at home. They're terrible on the road. So is what it is. It's just kind of it's just something. Like, I don't really know if there's a real reason for it. And sometimes that's just the case. But that's it for Q&A. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.